the chief rabbi of Great Britain, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, has often talked about the biblical story of Exodus from slavery to freedom in the Promised Land, and the long journey across the wilderness, and how that's inspired Jews and non-Jews for thousands and thousands of years. In particular, in the last century or so, it's really inspired civil rights groups of African Americans and their struggle. And it's so funny that we just sang that song because we totally did not coordinate this at all. But I was going to say that in the 19th century, the African American civil rights groups, they sang, "Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt's land. Tell old Pharaoh, let my people go." Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. lived and breathed that story. And his speeches were often full of quotations from the Hebrew Bible. It was a story that gave him hope. And through that hope, he gave hope to his fellow African Americans in their search for freedom and civil rights. By 1968, however, the mood surrounding the civil rights movement was extremely tense, and many thought Dr. King was pursuing an impossible dream. Knowing of the opposition he faced, King sensed his life was in imminent danger. It was this premonition that led him that night to end his speech with extraordinarily prophetic words. He reminded his audience of the last days of Moses' life. Moses knew that it would not be himself to cross the Jordan River, to which he had led his people for 40 years. God granted him one last gift, a glimpse from afar, from a mountaintop across the river into the Promised Land. Moses' life had not been in vain. He had taken the people on the journey almost all the way, but it would be a new generation that would lead them into the Promised Land. These were almost the last words that Dr. King spoke that night. "We've got some difficult times ahead," King said. "But it doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop and I've looked over, and I've seen the Promised Land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the Promised Land." Dr. King knew all too well as well about the issue that I have come here to represent today, as the very next day after he delivered those prophetic words, he was assassinated. 40 years later, an African American, Barack Obama, was elected president of the United States for the first time. He had begun his campaign by writing a book to which he gave a significant title, The Audacity of Hope. Hope needs audacity. This is what Dr. King had: the courage to stay with his dream, even though he knew it was too much for some, too little for others, and too civil for the extremists. Even though he sensed he would not be there to see it come to fruition, he had the courage. He knew what the rabbis knew. One of my favorite quotes from the Talmud: "It is not for you to complete the task, but it is not for you to stand idle by as well." He had led the African Americans on a biblical journey. A generation later, they reached the Promised Land. The Jewish story, which we have come here to share today, I like to think of as kind of a meta-narrative for the West in their search for freedom. Like Yolanda, Dexter, Bernice, and Martin Luther King III, I lost my dad in an act of gun violence. I've since become an advocate for gun violence prevention, one of the biggest issues dividing our country right now. And no matter what happens this Tuesday in the State House Committee vote, whether our bill that I have forged sweat and tears into lives on or is finished here, I have a dream. From Isaiah 40, "I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted, every hill and mountain shall lay low, the rough places will be made straight, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. There is a Pesach custom to leave a chair and place setting open at your table for the prophet Elijah. That empty seat will feel palpably different this year. But it is ultimately faith that keeps us going, and as Isaiah continues, with this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope."